architecture. So bright and early on Tuesday, I headed down to LaGuardia. I'd never been to LaGuardia before. I got kind of excited when I realized that it was actually just like a 15-minute drive from the 125th Street Harlem train station, which is, you know, on my way to Grand Central. It's the stop before Grand Central, for anyone not familiar with the New York City area. And I was like, just 15 minutes to LaGuardia, that'll be great. Never been to LaGuardia, I'd heard bad things, but I thought this will be okay. Of course, talking to Adam, the project manager, who also lives up kind of near me. He's in Golden Bridge, which is kind of like equidistance from the city, something like that. He was like, oh, you know, I'm flying out of White Plains. And I was like, I wanted to fly out of White Plains because that's where Liz and I flew down to see my dad in March. We flew to West Palm Beach and there was a direct flight, which was fantastic. And yeah, there wasn't a direct flight to Charleston. And Adam was like, that's fine, you just do a connecting flight. He said, I don't like to fly out of LaGuardia. And of course, he's only 15 minutes away from the airport. We're like 35, maybe 40 minutes away. But still, LaGuardia, I got there and I was like, oh, this is great. I'm there, I got plenty of time, got my ticket, went through security, no problem. And I was like, oh, what everyone complains about. LaGuardia is great. And then I got there, and I'm ready, waiting for my flight. And first, just a little quick thing, and just like, oh, you know, it's like 5 minutes delayed. And it's like, oh, that's fine. And then it's like 15 minutes delayed. And it's like, okay. But then they start boarding, or no, they changed the terminal we were at. So we're sitting there, and just kind of like keeping an eye on the gate, like listening for an announcement. And then I just see like, oh, now it's a different terminal, but they didn't change the the boarding time because we had already passed the time it was supposed to start boarding. And then they changed the terminal and the gate. So everyone starts rushing over to the other gate. We get there. Boarding isn't happening yet, and we're like, oh, okay, strange. So we stand around, wait a little bit longer, eventually get on the plane. Okay, great, we're about to take off. Nope, the tire looks a little bit bald, so they changed the tire, something I've never seen happen while in a plane before, and I still didn't see it because it was under the plane. And then we go a little bit down the runway, and then it's like, oh, well, you know, we got backed up a little bit. Oh, now there's some reports we have to fill out, something to do with like a pinion bearing or something like that. It's like, okay. And then finally we were like queued up in line, and it's like, okay, folks, we gotta wait another 10, 15 minutes, the weather now. So it was like, all in all, we actually were delayed about 2 hours, which it was funny. I found it more amusing than anything. You know, I wasn't like in a crazy hurry to get down there. I knew that we'd given ourselves enough time to get done everything we had to get done at the theater we were going to, but it was just a silly thing because it was all like these little 10 to 15 minute increments of delays just adding up to 2 hours. So I felt bad for anyone on the flight who like really had to get down there right away. Anyway, arrived in Charleston, beautiful city, started chatting with the taxi driver, taking us to the Gaillard Center, who took us to our hotel first, and just learned all about the history, about, you know, King Charles, it being named after that, and then, of course, when after the Revolutionary War, it's like, well, it was called Charlestown, let's get rid of all references to King Charles, and let's just call it Charlestown. So, you know, you remove like one letter, whoop-de-doo. But yeah, really interesting city, you know, minus the things like, you know, oh, here's Market Street, this is where all the slaves were sold. So it's interesting to balance. You know, like on the one hand, it's one of the oldest cities in all of America, so it's really interesting to balance that kind of like, oh, it's amazing, look at this architecture, look at these buildings, these are some of the oldest buildings in America, and to get excited about that aspect of the history, but then have some of the other historical aspects that are, you know, still a part of our history, but maybe a little bit more unsavory. And then, of course, you know, we drove right by the church that had a terrible tragedy not too long ago, and it was actually really interesting to have our taxi driver give us kind of his perspective on that. And I mean, he seemed to be, I mean, he was born and bred in Charleston, and to have him talk more about, you know, the way that tragedies like that can kind of bring a community together in a certain way was actually kind of beautiful. So I was very grateful to kind of get a take from a local like that on the whole experience. But obviously, terrible tragedy. We got to the hotel, immediately went over to the theater, and yeah, looked kind of like this. You know, we've been hearing these things from my office for a long time now about how it was going really slow. I think that's the closest I can show it to you for like NDC reasons or something like that. But, you know, the rigging department had been there, and, you know, the project manager had been there back and forth, and our lighting department had been there, and nothing was really going according to schedule or on time. And so there was an assumption that me and my partner in the seating department being down there, that we'd have all sorts of problems with the seating, mostly because we knew the seating had been put in the building at a pretty early stage when there's still a lot of construction happening around it, and so the assumption was the seats were going to be damaged, that stuff might have fallen on it, that paint had gotten on them, that things had been chipped and nicked. And turns out, you know, well, this is called punch listing, by the way, I've only punch listed, I think, 4 theaters in the like 3.5 years I've been at FDA, and I would say these are the seats that have turned out the best. Surprise! They were actually relatively straightforward. You know, the thing is, a lot lot of times whenever anyone wants something that's particularly custom with a seating manufacturer, that's where you run into problems. I was looking at a project we did in New York City for the new school where they wanted to add like some wooden backs to all the seats, and that actually made like the leg room really tight and caused all sorts of problems with like that connection with the wooden back. But these are like standard. The seating manufacturer is called Series. This is a chair they do all the time. Turned out great. Like pretty much we go through all 2,100 seats in the theater and just like shake each one. We make sure that it goes up and down. We've checked for nicks and that kind of thing. And in this case, they were all bagged. They all had bags over them because construction and painting and everything was still going on. So we like go through a row, take off all the bags, check them all, put the bags back on, and just mark down anything we'd noticed. Not the most exciting work, but there's you can kind of get into a rhythm that's can be almost therapeutic, the same way like knitting or swimming or something like that can be. The repetition can be totally fine. By the second day, of course, I had some music going on, so that definitely helped pass the time and stopped the mind numbingness from being too numbing. Speaking of mind numbing though, there was, as I mentioned, spray painting and everything happening the whole time, which pretty much, I could say it got us pretty high. Like I was feeling pretty lightheaded by the end of the day. There wasn't a lot of ventilation going on. There might have been, some rules being broken, but luckily, no major headaches or anything after that. Thankfully, I'm not the one who's pregnant, so I'm not as worried about that kind of thing. But yeah, we cranked through about half of the orchestra on the first day. On the second day, it was like a full day of this, so we got the rest of the orchestra and the top balcony, which had a bunch of seats. We looked at the railings, we talked about some of these as-built conditions, and as someone that's designing these kinds of spaces, mostly in CAD actually, sometimes in Revit and 3D and now VR, it's so helpful to actually see these things built. And this, by the way, I should mention this up top, was one of the first buildings that I ever worked on when I came to FDA. This was under my late mentor Douglas Stebbins, who had already done quite a bit of the room, and I was there with him kind of helping to make some final decisions. Where are we putting the wheelchairs, where the transfer arm's going to be, that's also related to wheelchair positions, where can we squeeze in a few extra seats when the seat count was a little bit too low, and yeah, everything about deciding like here's the 20-inch seats, here's the 21-inch seats, here's how we design an offset so that you're kind of always looking between two other people's heads. And it was really kind of amazing this is the first space I've gotten to be in, like a built theater space where I could be like, oh wow, like here's some of the choices I made, and that was a really good feeling. The closest I've come to that so far, besides like theater with like set design and stuff like that, is actually with the stuff we did for Park Avenue Armory, which I guess is still technically theater, because like for example with Macbeth, that was such a quick turnaround time where we were designing the way all that temporary seating was going to be done, and then figuring out very quickly how all that was going to work, and then it got built, and then it was like, oh god, 2 weeks later, this is what the result is, and we made all these choices. So I guess that's really the exciting thing, is that idea of like working through a problem, making a choice, and then seeing something built like in the real world that is a result of that choice. And so yeah, even though the job we were down there for in South Carolina wasn't the most exciting thing, it was still very cool to spend a lot of time in the space and appreciate some of the details, the way the railings were done, the way that certain swoops and curves and layout options were done. It was really cool. Like for example, just a quick thing, I like the fact that the top is continental seating, means you don't have aisles in between the seats just at the end, and what that means is for code you actually have to make deeper aisles, and so that's kind of interesting because that means that there's more space for people to get in, but if someone's like going to be seated late and they're in the middle, it takes a while for them to get there. Also you end up with a really steep rake, so every single row has its own railing, so that was kind of interesting to contrast that to the balcony below, and of course everything going on in the orchestra. But it seems like everyone's going to have great views, so I hope that space has many wonderful performances in the future, both cathartic and comforting, and hooray, it was great to do that. And then I'll just say very briefly that we finished up a little bit early on Thursday, and so we got a chance to just explore the town a little bit. We had a bunch of great food. We ate with one of the architects and project managers and just a few other people involved with the project, and I ate some amazing cake, and I had some triggerfish, which was incredible. I tried some shrimp and grits, which was kind of good but way too greasy, and yeah, all sorts of great food. Every bit of food there's amazing. I had some Charleston green tea mint lemonade drink stuff that was really good, and some Italian ice. Walked around the waterfront, beautiful breeze, and this just made me really happy. Totally unrelated to architecture or anything like that. I was sitting at the waterfront for a little bit, just kind of relaxing, enjoying the atmosphere, and reading American Gods, which I'm loving, by the way. I'll mention that briefly in books. And then this couple, like, there's all these people around. This older couple comes up to me and says, "Oh, young man, would you mind taking our picture?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And I go up and I take the picture and, say, "Oh, there you go." And they say, "Oh, we're so sorry to bother you. We hope you didn't mind that." And I said, No problem at all. Yeah, have a good day." And they said, "We just want you to know, we picked you because you just looked like the nicest guy out of everyone around here." And that was just a really sweet thing to say. Like, it's a great line to use anytime you need to ask someone to do a favor, but like, that kind of warmed my heart. So, Southern hospitality, Southern kindness, something like that. Anyway, yeah, that was my architecture trip for the week. Once the baby comes, I have no idea. I mean, I've already only been doing this like once a year. Last year I went to the Tobin Center that we were doing in San Antonio. So, I mean, maybe once a year is still okay. But of course, in my head right now, I'm thinking like, I can't ever leave for 3 days with a baby at home. But we'll see. Architecture.